The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the tall courthouse windows, scattering soft golden rays across polished floors and wooden benches. Reporters stood in hushed clusters outside, their cameras ready, their whispers electric with curiosity. Inside, the air carried a quiet tension, that kind of stillness that only comes before something extraordinary. It wasn't the defendant, the lawyers, or even the judge who drew the attention that day. It was a little girl, barely 3 years old, sitting silently beside her mother in the front row. Her name was Lily Carter, and though her shoes dangled far above the floor, her presence filled the entire courtroom. She held a tiny, worn-out teddy bear in her lap, one ear missing and one button eye barely hanging on. Her small fingers kept tracing the stitches, as if she were drawing courage from the familiar toy. People whispered softly, wondering why a toddler was there in such a serious trial. The case had already made national headlines, the arson that took the life of firefighter Daniel Carter, a man known for saving countless lives. His death had shaken the small community, not just because of who he was, but because no one could understand why it happened. The accused sat just a few feet away, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. His name was Evan Blake, a man with a criminal record and a history of violence. Evidence against him was thin, circumstantial, at best. The prosecution struggled to find direct proof that tied him to the deadly blaze. That was why this day mattered. Today, a witness, one no one had expected, would be brought forward. But how could a 3-year-old child help? Even the defense attorney shook his head slightly, whispering to his client, "This is ridiculous. She can't testify. She's a baby." Across the courtroom, Officer Ryan Daniels, a seasoned cop with calm gray eyes, adjusted the leash of his K9 partner, Max. The big German shepherd sat obediently beside him, his coat gleaming under the light, his steady gaze scanning the room. Max had been a police dog for 4 years, sharp, loyal, and remarkably intuitive. He had helped track suspects, locate missing people, and even detect explosives. But today was different. As the bailiff called the court to order, the judge entered and took his seat. The murmurs died instantly. Lily's mother, Emily Carter, held her daughter's hand tighter, her own eyes red from sleepless nights. She knew how much this case meant, not just to her, but to the man she had lost. When the prosecutor rose, his voice was gentle. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to call Mrs. Emily Carter to the stand." Emily stood slowly, kissed Lily's forehead, and made her way to the witness chair. Her steps were steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the Bible to take the oath. The courtroom seemed to breathe with her, waiting, watching. She began speaking softly, her voice filled with pain and warmth. She talked about her husband, how devoted he was to his work, how much he loved his little girl. She spoke of that terrible night, the smell of smoke, the sound of sirens, the helplessness of being trapped as flames consumed their home. She recounted how firefighters pulled her and Lily out in time, but her husband never made it. Every word carried weight. The defendant's face tightened, the jury leaned forward, and even the judge's eyes softened. But as powerful as Emily's story was, the real turning point hadn't yet arrived. Because all the while, as Emily spoke, Max sat still, alert, but unusually focused. His gaze wasn't on the judge, or the defendant, or the lawyers. It was fixed on Lily. Officer Daniels noticed. He frowned, slightly tugging the leash. Max didn't move. The dog's ears perked. His tail gave a slight twitch, and he let out a quiet, almost imperceptible whine. It wasn't agitation. It was recognition. Lily, sensing it, turned her head. Her big brown eyes met Max's. For a long, strange moment, they simply looked at each other. The child's hand loosened on her teddy bear. The air seemed to hum between them, a connection unexplainable, invisible, but real. The judge noticed the moment. "Is the child all right?" he asked gently. Emily turned to look at her daughter, confused. "She's fine, Your Honor. Just tired." But Lily wasn't tired. Something deep inside her had stirred. Officer Daniels knelt beside Max, whispering, "Easy, boy. Sit." Max obeyed, but his eyes didn't leave Lily. It was as if he was remembering something from that night. The prosecutor cleared his throat and asked Emily if her daughter had spoken about the fire since that day. Emily shook her head slowly. "No, sir. She hasn't said a word since. Not one. The doctors said it's trauma, that her mind is protecting her from the memory." The courtroom fell silent. The judge, compassionate but curious, looked toward Lily. "Young lady," he said softly, "you're very brave for being here. Do you remember what happened that night?" No one expected her to respond. For months, she had lived in silence. Even Emily lowered her head, not wanting her daughter to feel pressured. But something unexpected happened. Lily didn't hide her face. She didn't cry. She just blinked, once, twice, and then glanced again at the police dog. Max tilted his head, ears twitching. It was a small moment, almost imperceptible, but it sent a wave of murmurs through the crowd. The tension was palpable. Emily whispered, "Sweetheart, it's okay. You can tell the nice people anything you want." Lily looked at her mother, then back at Max. Slowly, she slid off her chair, clutching her teddy bear tightly. Her little shoes tapped softly against the courtroom floor as she walked, one step, then another, toward Officer Daniels and the police dog. No one moved. Every eye followed her. The defense attorney looked puzzled. The prosecutor held his breath. Even the judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Max didn't move either. He just waited, tail low, eyes gentle. When Lily reached him, she stopped, just a few feet away. The silence in the courtroom was so thick you could hear hearts beating. Then, something incredible happened. Max lowered his head slowly, almost bowing, and gave a quiet whine, the kind he used to comfort children at community events. Lily's eyes softened. Her lips parted, but no words came. Not yet. Officer Daniels was frozen in disbelief. He had seen Max comfort people before, but never like this. There was something purposeful about the dog's behavior, as though he knew this little girl from somewhere. And then, just as quickly as the moment came, it passed. Lily turned around, walked back to her mother, and climbed onto her lap again. The prosecutor, unsure how to proceed, cleared his throat. "No further questions for now, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Very well. We'll recess for 15 minutes. As people stood and began to whisper again, one thing was clear. Something had shifted in that room. No one could explain it, but everyone felt it. A bond had formed, a bridge between an innocent child and a loyal police dog. And deep down, Officer Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that this strange connection was just the beginning of something much bigger. He looked down at Max, who was still staring toward the little girl, eyes unwavering. "Do you know her, boy?" he whispered quietly. Max's tail flicked once in reply. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed, journalists speculated, and the story began to take shape. The silent child who looked at the police dog. No one yet knew that what was about to unfold would shock the entire nation, bring justice to a grieving family, and remind everyone watching that sometimes the purest voices come from those least expected to speak. The courtroom resumed after a short break, but the energy inside had changed. Something about that silent exchange between Lily and the police dog lingered in everyone's mind. Reporters whispered furiously, scribbling notes and snapping pictures. Even the judge, who had seen decades of trials, couldn't quite shake the image of a toddler walking confidently toward a K-9, like they'd known each other all their lives. When Officer Ryan Daniels returned to his seat, Max was unusually restless. Normally, the disciplined dog stayed still, calm, collected, waiting for his handler's command. But now his body was tense, his eyes following Lily wherever she moved. He seemed to sense something that no one else could. Officer Daniels leaned down, gently patting his head. "Easy, boy," he whispered. "She's just a kid." But Max didn't relax. His ears remained perked, and his tail gave faint, uncertain flicks. Across the room, Lily sat in her mother's lap, playing quietly with her teddy bear. She didn't look frightened. If anything, she looked curious. Every few moments, she'd peek toward Max again, as though she wanted to go back and see him. Emily Carter, her mother, noticed too. "She's never looked at any animal like that," she whispered to the prosecutor seated nearby. "She's always been scared of dogs since that night." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "But she's not scared of him." Emily shook her head slowly. "No, it's like she knows him." That comment sent a ripple of realization through Officer Daniels. He glanced at the K-9 beside him, then at the little girl, replaying in his mind every mission Max had been on. 4 years of service, hundreds of calls, dozens of rescues. Was it possible that Max had crossed paths with this family before? The judge's gavel brought silence back to the room. "Court is now in session," he said firmly. "Prosecution, you may continue." The prosecutor nodded and stood, adjusting his papers. "Your Honor, we would like to present the events surrounding the night of the Carter fire, specifically regarding the initial response and the role of K-9 Unit 4, Officer Ryan Daniels and his partner, Max." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Even the defense attorney straightened up. Officer Daniels stood and approached the witness stand. Max followed obediently, his movements sharp, controlled, and dignified. The officer placed a hand on the Bible, took the oath, and settled in. "Officer Daniels," the prosecutor began, "can you describe the events of the night in question?" "Yes, sir," Daniels replied, his voice steady. "On the night of March 4th, 2023, at approximately 2:18 a.m., I received a call regarding a structure fire on Oak Ridge Lane. Max and I were among the first responders to arrive. The fire had already engulfed most of the home." He paused, taking a slow breath, as flashes of that terrible night came flooding back. The roar of flames, the choking smoke, the cries for help. Max and I conducted a search around the perimeter. We located 2 survivors, Mrs. Emily Carter and her daughter, near the back door. They were unconscious but alive. Max found them by scent. The courtroom leaned in. The prosecutor continued, "Did your K-9 partner behave unusually that night?" Daniels frowned slightly. "At first, no. But when we were pulling the survivors out, Max suddenly broke from my side and ran toward the front of the house. He started barking aggressively at something or someone. I couldn't see clearly through the smoke. By the time I reached him, whoever he was chasing had fled into the woods behind the property." The room buzzed with murmurs. The judge rapped his gavel once. "Order in the court." The prosecutor nodded and said, "Was there any indication that someone might have been responsible for the fire?" Daniels nodded slowly. "Based on Max's reaction and the fact that there were signs of forced entry, yes. But we never found enough evidence to confirm who it was." Across the room, the defendant shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. The prosecutor paced slowly. "Now, Officer Daniels, since that night, has Max ever shown recognition toward anyone related to this case?" Daniels hesitated. He glanced at Lily. Max was watching her again, tail low but moving, eyes soft with something that looked almost like recognition. "Today," Daniels finally said. Today is the first time I've seen him act this way toward anyone connected to that fire." A hush fell. The judge leaned forward. "What way, exactly?" Daniels gestured slightly toward Lily. He's been calm but focused. He hasn't taken his eyes off her. And earlier, when she approached him, he responded the same way he does when he recognizes someone he's rescued. A collective murmur swept the room again. Lily looked up from her teddy bear, blinking at all the attention. Max tilted his head, his tail thumping lightly on the floor. The defense attorney scoffed. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we're putting a dog on the stand now? This is absurd." But the judge raised a hand. "You'll have your chance to cross-examine, Counselor." "Continue, Mr. Cole." The prosecutor nodded and took a deep breath. "Officer Daniels, one final question. If Max recognized someone today, what might that indicate about his memory of the event?" "Dogs like Max," Daniels said firmly, "don't forget trauma. He associates smells, sounds, and emotions. If he recognizes Lily, that means she was part of that night in a way deeper than we understood." The judge nodded thoughtfully, his expression unreadable. When Daniels stepped down, he returned to his seat beside Max. The dog immediately leaned against his leg, still staring toward the little girl. Minutes ticked by as the next witness was called, the fire investigator, then the medical examiner. But the audience's attention kept drifting back to Lily and Max. The little girl occasionally glanced over, her expression changing from curiosity to comfort. It was as if Max's presence anchored her, as if she finally felt safe. And came a moment that no one expected. During a recess, as the lawyers prepared for the next argument, Max suddenly stood. His leash tightened in Daniels's grip. His ears were rigid, and a low rumble built in his chest. He wasn't looking at Lily anymore. He was looking at the defendant. The man froze, eyes darting toward the canine. "Max, heel," Daniels commanded quickly. But Max didn't obey right away. His growl deepened, his fur standing on end. The room tensed, and security officers instinctively moved closer to the defendant's table. The judge, startled, demanded, "Officer Daniels, control your animal." Daniels pulled the leash firmly and crouched beside Max, whispering, "What is it, boy? What's wrong?" Max's nostrils flared as if he caught a scent, faint but familiar. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the growling stopped. The dog sat back down, chest rising and falling with quiet intensity. The judge exhaled. "Let's take another short break." When the room cleared, Daniels led Max into the hallway. "Talk to me, buddy," he muttered, scratching the dog's neck. "What are you trying to tell me?" Max looked up at him, ears twitching. Then, turning his head slightly, he looked through the glass window, straight toward Lily, who sat on a bench with her mother. Daniels followed his gaze. Lily noticed and waved shyly. For the first time that day, Max wagged his tail, slow and deliberate, a gesture of recognition and warmth. Something in Daniels's chest tightened. He remembered how Max had barked that night, not in anger, but in warning. He remembered finding Lily unconscious, clutching that same teddy bear. Maybe Max had stayed by her side before rescuers arrived. Maybe he remembered her scent, the one person he'd saved in that inferno. When court resumed, the atmosphere was heavier, charged with quiet awe. No one could fully explain what they had witnessed, but one thing was certain. There was more to the connection between that little girl and the police dog than anyone had imagined. And deep down, Officer Daniels began to suspect that Max's memory of that night wasn't just about rescue. It was about recognition, justice, and something even deeper that hadn't yet come to light. The stage was set for what was about to become one of the most unforgettable moments in courtroom history. A moment when truth would no longer come from words alone, but from the unbreakable bond between a child and a loyal police dog. The afternoon sun had begun to fade, casting long amber streaks across the courtroom walls. Shadows lengthened over the floor, adding a kind of still melancholy to the air. Everyone in the room could feel the tension rising, not from loud arguments or fiery exchanges, but from something unspoken. It came from the smallest person in the room. Little Lily Carter sat quietly on the wooden bench beside her mother, the same teddy bear in her lap, its stuffing slightly spilling out. Her round eyes were distant, fixed on nothing in particular. The courthouse murmurs faded around her, as though the world had turned to a soft blur. The court had seen witnesses break down, suspects confess, and families cry. But there was something different about this silence, a silence that carried weight. Since the fire that claimed her father's life, Lily hadn't spoken a single word. Psychologists called it selective mutism, a form of trauma response in children. But to her mother, it was like watching a light dim inside her daughter. The bright, curious voice that once sang silly songs, now locked away behind fear and memory. Emily Carter sat beside her, brushing a hand through Lily's soft brown hair. Her heart ached seeing her daughter like this. Every time she looked at her, she saw not only innocence, but also the shadow of that terrible night, the smoke, the screaming, the unbearable heat, and the moment she realized her husband wasn't coming out of the fire. On the opposite side of the room, Officer Ryan Daniels kept glancing at his canine partner, Max. The dog hadn't taken his eyes off Lily since the hearing began. Daniels had been through hundreds of cases, drug busts, rescues, and even hostage situations, but this was something he couldn't quite explain. Max was behaving differently, not aggressive, not alert, almost protective. During the break, several reporters had tried to approach the officer, asking if Max's behavior meant anything. Daniels had brushed them off politely. But inside, he couldn't deny what he saw. That same bond between the dog and the little girl, unspoken but unbreakable. Now, as the courtroom came to order again, the prosecutor, David Cole, adjusted his glasses and rose from his seat. "Your Honor," he began, "we have heard testimony from Officer Daniels and the fire investigators. But we have one more statement to consider, one from the victim's family." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Cole looked at Emily. "Mrs. Carter, I know this is difficult, but could you tell the court about the night of the fire? Specifically, what your daughter might have seen or heard?" Emily hesitated, swallowing hard. Her eyes flickered toward Lily, then back to the judge. "It was late," she began softly. "Daniel, my husband, was home after a long shift. He tucked Lily into bed himself that night. She loved those bedtime stories. Then I remember waking up to the smell of smoke. The heat, the alarms." Her voice broke slightly. Across the courtroom, people listened in silence. Emily continued, wiping her tears. "I grabbed Lily and ran to the back of the house, but the fire had already spread. We couldn't get out. I thought we were going to die." Her hands trembled as she spoke. "Then, through the smoke, I saw a shadow. It wasn't Daniel. It was someone else. I didn't see the face, but there was a figure moving fast toward the front of the house. And then I heard barking, loud, fierce barking. That's when I fainted." The courtroom was completely still. The prosecutor leaned closer. "And when you woke up?" Emily exhaled shakily. "I was in the hospital. They told me Daniel didn't make it. They said a K-9 unit found me and Lily just in time." She looked toward Officer Daniels and Max, her lips trembling. "It was him, wasn't it?" "Max saved us." Daniels gave a slow nod. "He did, ma'am." The judge smiled gently. "You owe your lives to that brave animal." Emily turned to look at her daughter. But ever since that night, Lily hasn't spoken a single word. Not one, I think. I think she remembers something she's too scared to say." The judge's expression softened. He leaned forward slightly. "Lily, sweetheart," he said gently, "you're very brave to be here today. Do you remember that night? Anything at all?" Every person in the courtroom held their breath. Lily didn't move. Her little hands tightened around her teddy bear, and she stared at the floor. For a long moment, it was nothing but the faint hum of the air conditioning and the scratching of a reporter's pen. Then, slowly, she lifted her gaze, not toward the judge, not toward the lawyers, but toward Max. The dog tilted his head, ears flicking forward, as if waiting for something. A few people noticed and turned to watch. The moment stretched, fragile and electric. Emily whispered, "Sweetheart, you can tell them. It's okay." But Lily didn't speak. Instead, she slid off the bench. Her small feet made soft tapping sounds against the courtroom floor as she began to walk. The bailiff instinctively stepped forward, unsure what to do, but the judge held up a hand. "Let her." Lily kept walking until she stood just a few feet from the K9. The entire room was frozen. The prosecutor stopped flipping his notes. The defense attorney leaned back, confused but curious. The reporter's cameras clicked softly in the background. Lily's teddy bear dangled from her hand. Her eyes met Max's again, and this time there was no fear. Only recognition, deep, pure, and certain. Max remained still, his body rigid, his eyes locked on hers. His tail gave a small, single wag, the kind he used to reassure someone in distress. Officer Daniels felt his breath catch. He could feel the electricity between them. The judge spoke softly. "Officer Daniels, is your dog under control?" "Yes, Your Honor," Daniels replied. "He's calm." But what happened next made even the most skeptical observer believe in something beyond logic. Lily took another small step forward. The air was thick with silence. Then, for the first time in months, maybe since the night of the fire, she opened her mouth as if to speak. But no sound came. Instead, she reached out her tiny hand and placed it gently on Max's head. The dog's eyes softened instantly. He leaned forward, sniffing her hand, then licked it once. A small sound, a whimper of recognition, escaped his throat. Lily blinked. For a moment, tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't from fear. They were from something deeper, memory. Her mother gasped quietly, covering her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. Lily turned her head slightly and looked toward the judge, then back at Max. Her small lips trembled, but still she stayed quiet. The courtroom sat completely still. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed to stop. Finally, the judge broke the silence. "We'll recess for today," he said softly. "This court stands adjourned until tomorrow morning." As the gavel struck, the people slowly began to move. But everyone kept glancing at Lily and Max. Emily lifted her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly. "You did so good, sweetheart," she whispered through tears. "So good." Officer Daniels walked over, kneeling beside them. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I think Max remembers her. He's reacting the same way he did the night of the fire." Emily smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Then maybe he can help her remember too." Lily looked at the officer, then at Max, and smiled faintly, her first real smile in months. Outside, as the crowd of reporters erupted in questions and flashbulbs, Daniels led Max toward the exit. The dog paused once more, looking back at Lily through the courtroom doors before walking out into the fading light. And though no one could explain it yet, something incredible had begun that day. A connection between a child who had lost her voice and a dog who carried the truth in his memory. Neither of them knew it yet, but the moment Lily reached out her hand had set in motion the unraveling of the mystery, and by the time the trial ended, her voice would return, and justice would roar louder than the fire that had once silenced her. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the courthouse, turning the marble floor into a mosaic of gold. The next day's hearing was already drawing a crowd: reporters, townspeople, and a few curious strangers who had heard the story on the evening news. Everyone was talking about the little girl who hadn't spoken in months, and the police dog who seemed to understand her pain. Inside the courtroom, the air was charged with quiet anticipation. Officer Ryan Daniels stood beside Max, his hand resting gently on the canine's collar. The dog sat perfectly still, tail curled beside him, eyes scanning the room, not searching for danger, but looking for someone specific. At the far end, Emily Carter sat holding her daughter on her lap. Lily wore a pale yellow dress today, her favorite, one her father had bought her for her 3rd birthday. She held her teddy bear tightly, the same one that had survived the fire with her. Her big brown eyes seemed a little clearer, less clouded by fear than yesterday. The judge entered the courtroom, his robe flowing behind him. The murmurs stopped immediately. "Court is now in session," he announced. "We will continue with the case regarding the Carter residence fire. Mr. Cole, you may proceed." The prosecutor, David Cole, rose from his seat. "Thank you, Your Honor. Yesterday's testimony raised important questions. The victim's wife, Mrs. Carter, described a shadowed figure at the scene. We believe the child, Lily Carter, may have witnessed the same, perhaps even seen the person responsible." The defense attorney objected softly. "The child is 3 years old. She's suffered trauma. Any assumption about what she saw is unreliable." The judge nodded. "Understood. But if she wishes to speak, this court will listen." The words hung in the air. Emily's heart pounded. She turned to her daughter and whispered, "Sweetheart, remember, you're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you. You can tell the truth." Lily looked up, uncertain. She glanced around, her eyes darting from the judge to the crowd, then finally to Max. The dog met her gaze again, calm, steady, protective. He didn't move, didn't blink. It was as though he was telling her, "It's okay. You're safe now." The judge leaned forward kindly. "Lily, would you like to come here? You don't have to, only if you want." For a moment, she hesitated. Then, slowly, she slid off her mother's lap, her little shoes tapping softly on the floor. She began to walk toward the witness stand. Every person in the room held their breath. Officer Daniels instinctively gave Max the hand signal to stay calm. But Max didn't need it. He was already watching her every step with quiet focus, not as a police dog now, but as a guardian. When Lily reached the front, she didn't climb onto the chair. Instead, she stopped in front of Max again, just as she had yesterday. The judge smiled gently. "You like Max, don't you?" Lily gave a tiny nod. Her mother clasped her hands tightly, whispering silent prayers. The prosecutor spoke softly. "Lily, can you tell us something about that night? Do you remember who was there?" For a long moment, she said nothing. The courtroom was utterly still, the kind of silence that hums in your chest. Then, Lily did something that made Officer Daniels' throat tighten. She reached into her small pocket and pulled out a tiny metal badge, tarnished, but still shiny enough to catch the light. Gasps rippled through the room. "That's..." Daniels started, stepping closer. "That's an old K9 unit badge." Emily's hand flew to her mouth. "Daniels' badge? Her father's?" The prosecutor frowned. "Her father was also a K9 officer?" "Yes," Emily whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Daniel Carter. He served with the department for 7 years. His partner was..." Her voice broke. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Max, he finished softly. The judge looked between the two officers, one living, one gone, and the loyal canine sitting beside them. So Max once belonged to Officer Carter? Daniels nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Max was reassigned to me after Carter's death. But I had no idea this was the same family. The realization swept over the courtroom like a wave. Max's eyes softened as if recognizing something deep within the little girl. A scent, a memory, a voice that had once called his name with laughter. And then it happened. Lily looked straight at the dog, her small lips trembling. Everyone leaned in, straining to hear. Her voice, soft and shaky, but unmistakably real, broke the silence that had lasted for months. She whispered two words. Daddy's dog. A gasp filled the courtroom, sharp, collective, and stunned. Emily froze. Officer Daniels blinked in disbelief. The judge lowered his glasses, speechless. For the first time, Lily's voice carried through the room, tiny but powerful enough to move everyone who heard it. Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks as she pressed her hand to her heart. Oh my God! She spoke. Max let out a soft whine. Not a bark, not a growl, but a low, emotional sound, almost as if he understood what she said. He stepped forward slightly, tail wagging once. Lily crouched down and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck. Daddy's dog, she said again, louder this time, her voice shaking but full of warmth. It was like a dam had broken. Months of fear, grief, and silence spilled out in two simple words. The judge cleared his throat gently, eyes glistening. Well, I think we can all agree this young lady has said something far more powerful than any testimony today. Even the court reporter stopped typing, wiping her eyes. Emily rushed forward and knelt beside her daughter, holding her tightly. You did it, baby, she whispered. You finally did it. Lily buried her face in her mother's shoulder, still hugging Max with one arm. Daddy's dog saved us, she said softly. Officer Daniels knelt beside them, his voice low and warm. He sure did, sweetheart. And you helped him remember. The prosecutor, who had been watching silently, finally spoke. Your Honor, I believe this changes the nature of the case. If Max belonged to Officer Carter, he may have been trained to alert to specific cues, maybe even identify the suspect who entered the home that night. The judge nodded gravely. Then I suggest we allow the department to review the canine's field data and behavior reports. This could lead us closer to the truth. Outside, as the recess was called, reporters swarmed the steps. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, and the story spread like wildfire. The little girl who broke her silence for a dog. But inside, away from the noise, a quiet moment unfolded. Officer Daniels sat beside Max, stroking the dog's fur. You knew her all along, didn't you, buddy? He whispered. Max looked up, panting softly, tail thumping once against the floor. Emily approached, holding Lily's hand. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was peace in her smile. She hasn't spoken to anyone since that night. But today, it was like he unlocked something in her. Daniels smiled faintly. Maybe he remembered her father. Maybe she remembered too. Emily nodded. She said he came into her room that night. She thought she dreamed it, but now, she's starting to remember. Lily tugged her mother's sleeve and pointed at Max. Daddy's dog barked. At the man, she whispered. Emily froze. What man? Lily looked at the ground, her little brow furrowed. The man with the hat. He was in the fire. He was angry. The prosecutor, who had just stepped in, overheard and stopped in his tracks. The man with the hat? Lily nodded again. He had a mark. On his hand, Officer Daniels exchanged a sharp glance with Cole, the arson suspect, the one who disappeared before trial. He has a burn scar on his left hand. The prosecutor's voice turned urgent. Get me that file. Now. Emily pulled her daughter close, but for the first time in months, her fear was gone. Her daughter was remembering, and that memory might finally bring justice. Max leaned his head against Lily's leg. She smiled down at him, whispering again, "Good dog." And for the first time since the fire, everything felt right. Lily had found her voice. Max had found his purpose again. And somewhere beyond that courtroom, the spirit of her father, the brave officer who'd once trained that loyal dog, could finally rest knowing his daughter was no longer afraid. The courthouse corridors buzzed with whispers. News of the child's words, "Daddy's dog," had already made its way into every newspaper, every headline, every heart. What began as a simple testimony had turned into something extraordinary. But inside the investigation room, far from the noise, a new kind of tension filled the air, one heavy with truth waiting to be uncovered. Officer Ryan Daniels sat at the long wooden table, fingers drumming lightly as he studied the old files spread before him. Across from him sat Prosecutor David Cole, flipping through photographs of the fire scene, charred beams, melted frames, and smoke-stained walls. The evidence was old, but not forgotten. And lying beside them, as calm as ever, was Max, the loyal German shepherd whose eyes seemed to carry more wisdom than most men in the room. His ears twitched occasionally, alert to every sound, every voice. Emily Carter sat quietly in the corner, holding Lily in her lap. The little girl looked sleepy, but her eyes were clearer than they'd been in months. Since she had spoken those two words in court, her silence had lifted, little by little. It was as though the memories she had locked away were beginning to surface, gently, piece by piece. Daniels looked up at Emily. "I need to ask you again, Mrs. Carter. You're sure Daniel worked with Max before?" Emily nodded slowly. Yes, Max was his partner for years. They were inseparable. When Daniel came home, he used to tell Lily stories about him, how smart he was, how he could find anyone, anywhere. Daniels glanced down at the dog, smiling faintly. "He's still got that gift." Lily looked up. "He barked at the bad man," she whispered. Cole leaned forward. "Lily, sweetheart, can you tell us more about the bad man? What do you remember?" Her little brow furrowed as she tried to recall. "He came at night. Daddy was gone. Mommy was sleeping. I saw him in the hall. He had a big hat, and he smelled like smoke." Daniels exchanged a glance with Cole. "Smoke," he repeated quietly. Lily nodded again. "He hurt Daddy's dog. Max barked and he hit him." Emily's eyes widened. She never said that before. Daniels bent down, running his hand over Max's neck. "You've got an old scar here, don't you, buddy?" The faint mark under Max's fur told its own story, a burn scar barely visible. Cole's voice was low. So the dog was there. He was inside that house. Emily pressed a hand to her chest. "But how?" "The report said Daniel left him in the patrol unit that night." Daniels shook his head. If Daniel heard something or someone broke in, he would have called for Max immediately. It's instinct. He trained him himself. Cole stood up and began pacing slowly. The man with the hat. A burn scar on his hand. We had someone like that on record. Evan Blake. Emily's breath caught. The defendant. Yes, Cole confirmed. But there was another man associated with him, Paul Granger, an ex-fire inspector who was dismissed for arson-related corruption. He worked with Blake years ago. Daniel's mind raced. Granger disappeared after the first trial, didn't he? Exactly. Cole tapped the table. And if Lily saw someone else that night, a man who matched Granger's description, it means Blake wasn't working alone. He might have even been framed. The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of that possibility sank in. Then Max suddenly lifted his head, ears pricking forward. He gave a low, cautious bark. Daniels frowned. "What is it, boy?" Max stood, nose twitching. He moved toward the evidence boxes stacked near the wall. There was something deliberate about his movements, a trained precision that came from years of police work. He sniffed one of the old boxes, then another. Finally, he stopped at a sealed evidence bag containing a piece of burnt fabric. His nose pressed against it. Daniels leaned in. "That's from the Carter house, isn't it?" Cole nodded. "Recovered from near the living room window." Max barked again, louder this time. Emily's voice trembled. "What's he doing?" Daniels looked up, eyes wide. "He's alerting. That fabric carries a scent he recognizes." Cole blinked. "You mean he's identifying something or someone?" Daniels nodded slowly. "Yes, if it's what I think, this could connect Granger directly to the scene." He carefully retrieved the fabric and placed it on the table. "Let's test this again in the lab," he said firmly. "But I trust Max. He's telling us the truth." For the first time in weeks, Emily smiled faintly, just like Daniel used to. Lily reached out a small hand to pat Max's head. "Good dog," she whispered. The next few days blurred into long hours of investigation. The police reopened the Carter case officially, with Daniels and Max at the center of it. New forensic tests were ordered, old witnesses recalled, and digital files reanalyzed with updated equipment. Then, late one evening, Daniels received a call that made his heart race. "Daniels," came the voice of the lab tech on the other end, "you're not going to believe this. That fabric Max alerted to? It's got accelerant residue and traces of something else. A synthetic fire gel, the same compound used by arsonists in 3 other cases linked to Paul Granger." Daniels gripped the phone tighter. So Max was right. Dead on. You just reopened the biggest missing piece of this whole puzzle. By morning, the news had broken. The Carter fire case reopened after K9's discovery. Outside Emily's small suburban home, reporters camped again, cameras flashing as she held Lily close on the porch. "It's not about fame," she told them gently. "It's about the truth. My husband deserves justice, and my daughter deserves peace." Inside, Daniels knelt beside Max. "You did good, partner," he said softly. Max wagged his tail once, but his eyes remained alert. He wasn't done. Later that afternoon, Daniels received a lead from a small diner on the edge of town. A man matching Granger's description had been spotted there. Tall, rough beard, old burned scars on his left hand. Without hesitation, Daniels and Max were on the road. The drive was long, the air tense. Lily's small voice echoed in his mind. He had a hat. He hurt Daddy's dog. They reached the diner as dusk fell. The neon sign flickered weakly in the distance. Daniels parked across the street, his heart steady, his hand resting near his holster. "Stay close, Max," he whispered. They stepped inside. The diner smelled of coffee and old grease. Only a few people were there. A waitress cleaning tables, an old man reading a paper, and one figure in the back corner with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. Daniels approached slowly. "Paul Granger?" The man looked up, startled. His eyes darted to the exit, then to the badge on Daniels' chest. "End of the line," Daniels said quietly. Granger sneered. "You can't prove a thing." At that moment, Max growled, deep, low, primal. He stepped forward, nose pointed straight at the man, barking once, loud and sharp. The sound froze everyone. Granger's hand trembled. "That dog? I remember him." Daniel's voice hardened. "Yeah, he remembers you too." Granger stood abruptly, knocking over his coffee cup. That much should have burned with the rest of them. He spat. Before he could move, Daniels stepped in, slamming him against the counter, cuffing him swiftly. You're under arrest for arson and murder, Granger. And this time, you won't disappear? As they led him out, Max followed, calm but alert, eyes steady. Not out of anger, but duty. The case that had begun with silence now thundered toward justice. That night, Daniels drove back to Emily's home. Lily was already asleep, clutching her teddy bear, her breathing soft and peaceful. Emily opened the door quietly. "Did you find him?" she whispered. Daniels nodded. "Yeah, he's in custody." Max found him. Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you. Both of you." He looked down at Max, smiling faintly. "Don't thank me. Thank your husband's partner. He never stopped doing his job." Emily knelt beside Max, stroking his fur. "Thank you for bringing him home," she said softly. Max wagged his tail, letting out a low, contented sigh. And as Daniels looked around the quiet home, the framed photo of Officer Carter on the mantel, the soft hum of peace settling at last, he knew this wasn't just the end of an investigation. It was the beginning of healing. The man responsible was finally caught. The truth had risen from the ashes, and a little girl's courage and a loyal dog's memory had given justice a voice. The courthouse was once again full, but this time the atmosphere was different. It wasn't the heavy air of grief or uncertainty that had hung there before. Now there was quiet hope. The trial that had begun with confusion and heartbreak was nearing its end, and the truth had finally come to light. Officer Ryan Daniels sat at the prosecution table, files neatly stacked before him, while Prosecutor David Cole organized the final evidence presentation. The centerpiece of that evidence wasn't paper or photographs. It was Max, the loyal K9, sitting proudly by Daniel's side, his dark fur shining under the lights. On the opposite side sat Paul Granger, the man who had haunted the Carter family's life for years. His expression was cold, but there was a flicker of defeat in his eyes. The burn scars on his hand were visible, unmistakable. Behind them, in the front row, Emily Carter held Lily on her lap. The little girl wore a white ribbon in her hair, her teddy bear tucked safely under her arm. She looked calmer now, stronger. Every now and then, she peeked at Max, who responded with a gentle wag of his tail, a silent exchange of comfort and understanding. When the judge entered, the courtroom fell silent. "Court is now in session," he announced. "The People versus Paul Granger." Prosecutor Cole rose, buttoning his suit jacket. His voice was steady, but full of weight. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you've seen over the past few days is more than evidence. It's truth resurrected from ashes. For years, this case sat unsolved because the key witness couldn't speak. That witness wasn't an adult, wasn't a trained officer, and wasn't even human. It was a loyal police dog, a partner who never gave up on his duty, and a child whose courage brought us all here." He paused, glancing toward Emily and Lily. Sometimes justice doesn't come through power or experience. Sometimes it comes through innocence. Granger shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His attorney whispered something, but the man's eyes darted toward Max and then quickly away. Cole gestured to the evidence board behind him. Photos of the fire site, burn patterns, and accelerant samples lined the board, all pointing to one conclusion. The residue found in the Carter home matched compounds used in 3 other fires, all tied to Mr. Granger's past employment. And this, he lifted a charred piece of cloth, was identified by Max, the same K9 who served under Officer Daniel Carter, the victim of that fire. He turned to the jury. This dog remembered the scent of evil, the same scent that took his first handler's life. And through his instincts, through a little girl's bravery, We rediscovered what Daniel Carter tried to protect that night. His family. The room was utterly still. Cole took a deep breath. The prosecution rests, Your Honor. The defense attorney stood, his words brief and weary. My client maintains his innocence. He denies being present that night. But even as he spoke, the evidence spoke louder. The fingerprints, the accelerant match, the witness accounts, and most of all, Lily's testimony about the man with the hat. The judge looked at the jury. You may now deliberate. As the jurors filed out, Emily held her daughter close. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. 30 minutes, an hour, maybe more. Finally, the doors opened. The foreperson stood, holding the verdict slip. The judge took it, unfolded the paper, and read aloud, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Paul Granger, guilty on all counts, including first-degree arson and the murder of Officer Daniel Carter." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, followed by quiet sobs. Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming freely. Lily looked around, confused but sensing the relief. "Mommy, did the bad man go away?" she whispered. Emily nodded, voice trembling. "Yes, sweetheart. He's gone now." The judge continued, his tone solemn but kind. "Mr. Granger, you will serve a life sentence without parole. Officer Carter's bravery and the loyalty of his partner have finally been honored." When the gavel struck, the sound echoed like thunder, final, powerful, freeing. Max stood, tail wagging lightly. It was as if he understood. Officer Daniels knelt beside him, scratching behind his ear. "We did it, boy," he murmured. "You brought your partner's killer to justice." Reporters flooded the courthouse steps once again, but this time their questions were softer, respectful. Cameras flashed as Emily, Lily, and Daniels emerged together, Max walking proudly between them, head high. One reporter called out, "Mrs. Carter, how do you feel now that justice has been served?" Emily paused, looking down at her daughter before answering. "Grateful," she said softly. "Grateful that truth found its way home, through courage, loyalty, and love." Lily smiled shyly at the cameras. "Max is Daddy's dog," she said, her small voice clear and confident. The crowd melted at those words. Flashbulbs went off, and for once, the story wasn't about tragedy, it was about healing. Later that afternoon, the police department held a small ceremony to honor Officer Daniel Carter's memory. The sun dipped low in the sky, painting the world in warm gold. Officers lined up in formal salute as the chief spoke. "Today, we remember a hero who gave everything for his family and community. But we also honor the two souls who carried his legacy, a brave little girl and a faithful dog who never stopped serving." He turned toward Max and placed a new medal around the dog's neck. The Medal of Valor, awarded posthumously to Daniel Carter and his canine partner. Applause filled the courtyard. Emily held Lily close as tears welled in her eyes. "Your daddy would be so proud," she whispered. Lily smiled up at her. "Max misses Daddy too." Emily nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. But I think Daddy's watching from heaven and smiling." Officer Daniels knelt beside Max, his own eyes glistening. "You've done more than any of us could have asked," he said quietly. "Daniel would have been proud of you, partner." Max gave a small bark, tail thumping once against the ground. The crowd began to disperse, but Daniels lingered, watching Emily and Lily. For months, their lives had been defined by silence and pain. Now, laughter was beginning to return. Soft, tentative, but real. That evening, they visited the memorial at the fire station. A bronze plaque engraved with Daniel Carter's name gleamed in the fading light. Beside it was a photo of Daniel and Max during their patrol days, Daniel smiling, his hand on the dog's head. Lily knelt beside the plaque, placing her teddy bear there. "For Daddy," she whispered. "And for Daddy's dog." Emily wiped her eyes. "He'll love that, baby." As they turned to leave, Max stopped suddenly, his ears perking up. He stared at the horizon, tail wagging slowly. Daniels followed his gaze and smiled. "Go on, buddy," he said softly. Max barked once, as if answering an invisible call, the familiar voice of his first handler, perhaps. Then he turned back, pressing his head gently against Lily's knee before walking beside her once more. For the first time in a long time, the Carter family could breathe. The past had been painful, but the future shimmered with hope. And as the sun set behind the courthouse where everything began, one truth remained. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the powerful, but from the purest hearts. A child who refused to stay silent, and a loyal dog who refused to forget. Weeks had passed since the verdict, yet the story of the little girl and the police dog continued to ripple far beyond the small town where it all began. News outlets across the United States picked it up, from morning shows to evening broadcasts, from podcasts to social media feeds. The image that captured everyone's hearts was a single photograph. Lily Carter, a small 3-year-old girl, hugging Max, the loyal police dog, outside the courthouse, sunlight streaming behind them. That image became a symbol of innocence, courage, and unbroken bonds. But behind that iconic picture, life was slowly finding a new rhythm. Emily Carter had returned to work part-time as a school counselor, trying to rebuild the normalcy that had once felt impossible. Her days were quieter, calmer, but never empty. Every morning began with the same routine. Lily waking up, rubbing her sleepy eyes, and running straight to the backyard where Max waited, tail thumping in happy rhythm. "Good morning, Max," she would say, throwing her tiny arms around his neck. The dog would lick her cheek and nuzzle her gently, always patient, always protective. It was as if he had made a silent vow that as long as he breathed, no harm would ever come near this child again. Officer Ryan Daniels visited them often. He had grown close to both Emily and Lily, though he was careful never to overstep. To Lily, he was Uncle Ryan, the man who always brought her little treats and who made Max's tail wag uncontrollably whenever he came around. One sunny afternoon, Ryan pulled into the driveway carrying something special, a framed certificate and a small box. Emily met him at the door, surprised. "What's this?" she asked. Ryan smiled. "A little something from the department. I wanted to do it officially, but I thought it'd mean more here." He knelt down and opened the box in front of Lily. Inside was a shiny badge engraved with the words, "Honorary Junior Officer, Lily Carter." Lily's eyes widened. "For me?" Ryan nodded. "For you, Officer Lily, for being brave and helping Max find the truth." Lily giggled, her voice full of pride. "Does that mean I can arrest bad guys?" Emily laughed softly. "Maybe just the ones who don't brush their teeth." Ryan chuckled. "Exactly." He stood up, glancing toward Emily. "The chief also asked if you'd consider letting Max stay permanently with your family. He's officially retired now. They want him to live out his days somewhere he's loved." Emily looked down at Max, who sat quietly at Lily's feet, his brown eyes soft and content. "He already is home," she said simply. From that day on, Max wasn't just a canine officer anymore. He was family. Months passed, and life began to bloom again. Lily started preschool, and though she was shy at first, Max's presence gave her confidence. He often waited outside the classroom gate, his vest replaced with a simple collar bearing the words Hero of Hope. Teachers would wave and smile. "Your guardian's here again," they'd tease. Lily always answered proudly, "That's Max. He's my daddy's dog." The story spread even further when a local journalist published a detailed feature titled, The Dog Who Remembered Justice. The piece went viral, attracting millions of readers nationwide. Soon, talk shows invited Emily and Lily to share their experience, and donations poured in for children's trauma support and retired police K-9 South. But fame never changed them. Emily declined most offers, choosing peace over publicity. Her focus remained on giving Lily the childhood she deserved, one filled with laughter instead of fear. Still, one invitation stood out, a request from the National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund to attend an annual ceremony in Washington, D.C., honoring fallen officers. Daniel Carter's name had been added to the memorial wall that year. Emily hesitated at first. The memories were still raw. But Lily, now a little older and more expressive, held her mother's hand and said softly, "Mommy, Daddy would want us to go. Max too." And so they went. The trip was quiet, reflective. As their car approached the memorial site, the city's lights shimmered against the night sky. Officers from every state stood in formation, candles flickering in their hands. When Daniel's name was read aloud, Emily felt tears sting her eyes. The announcer continued, "Officer Daniel Carter, honored posthumously for his sacrifice in the line of duty. His legacy lives on through his family and through his K-9 partner, Max." A soft murmur went through the crowd as Max, wearing his medal, stepped forward beside Lily. The little girl reached out and placed her small hand on her father's engraved name. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered. "We did it." It was the most touching moment of the night. After the ceremony, an elderly officer approached Emily. His eyes were misty. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "in all my years on the force, I've seen bravery in many forms. But what your daughter and that dog did, it reminds us why we wear the badge." Emily smiled through her tears. "Thank you, sir. I think my husband would have said the same." That evening, as they walked along the reflecting pool, the city lights mirrored in the water, Lily looked up at her mom. "Mommy, is Daddy proud of me?" Emily knelt down, holding her close. "Oh yes, sweetheart. He's proud of you and Max and everything you've done. You helped people remember him." Lily smiled. "Then I'm happy." Back home, their lives continued with quiet grace. Max grew older, his muzzle dusted with gray, but his spirit remained strong. He followed Lily everywhere, to the park, the grocery store, even to the vet where he'd sit patiently as Lily held his paw. Emily often caught herself thinking about fate, how a tragedy had turned into a message of hope for so many. Letters still arrived in the mail, from parents, police officers, even children who said Lily and Max inspired them to be brave. One letter, from a young woman in Texas, stood out. It read, "I was scared to testify about what happened to me, but after seeing your daughter stand so bravely, I decided to speak up. Thank you for reminding me that even small voices matter." Emily folded that letter carefully and placed it in a drawer beside Daniel's photo. Some nights, she would sit on the porch with Ryan and watch Lily and Max playing in the yard. Fireflies flickered in the dark, and the world seemed peaceful again. "She's strong," Ryan said softly. "Just like her father." Emily nodded. "And Max? He never let go of him." Ryan smiled. "Dogs never do. They remember love longer than we do." For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to Lily's laughter echo through the air. In that laughter, Emily heard healing. In Max's steady gaze, she saw loyalty. And in the stars above, she felt Daniel, watching, proud, finally at peace. Years passed quietly in the Carter household. Seasons changed, but one thing never did: the sound of laughter that filled the small home every morning. Lily Carter had grown from a shy little girl into a confident 7-year-old with a bright smile and a curious heart. And always at her side, like a shadow that refused to fade, was Max, her faithful companion, protector, and best friend. He wasn't as fast as before. His once shiny black coat had turned peppered with gray, and his steps had slowed. But his eyes, those deep, intelligent eyes, still gleamed with warmth and loyalty. Every morning, Lily would wake before school, grab her backpack, and whisper the same words she'd spoken in that courtroom years ago. "Good boy, Max." The dog would lift his head, tail wagging slowly, and follow her to the door, his duty unbroken. Emily often stood by the kitchen window, watching them. She still felt that quiet ache whenever she saw Lily and Max together, a reminder of Daniel, the husband who had given everything. But over time, the pain had softened into something gentler, gratitude. Because somehow, Daniel's love still lived through Max and Lily's bond. One crisp autumn morning, the air smelled of rain and fallen leaves. The Carter family was preparing for a special day, a ceremony at the city's new memorial park dedicated to first responders. Lily had been asked to speak, not because she was the daughter of a fallen firefighter, but because of what she and Max had inspired years ago. Emily helped her practice her speech in the living room. Lily stood on a stool, reading from a small piece of paper in her clear, steady voice. "My daddy was brave," she said softly. "And Max was brave. They both showed me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right, even when you are." Emily felt tears welling up, but she smiled proudly. "Perfect, sweetheart. Your dad would be so proud." That afternoon, as they drove to the park, Max sat in the back seat, his head resting against Lily's shoulder. The park was filled with people, officers in uniform, families, and children holding small flags. A huge stone monument stood at the center, engraved with hundreds of names, including Daniel Carter. When it was Lily's turn to speak, she stepped up to the podium, clutching her note nervously. Max sat right beside her, his leash loose, his posture proud. Cameras clicked as the little girl began to speak. "Thank you for coming," she said, glancing down at Max. "This is my best friend, Max. He helped me be brave when I couldn't talk. He helped everyone see the truth. My daddy used to say that heroes wear badges, but sometimes heroes have tails too." The crowd chuckled softly, their eyes misting. Lily continued, her voice growing stronger. "I miss my daddy, but I know he's still watching. And I think he's happy because Max stayed with me. He's getting old now, but he still takes care of me, every single day." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the officers standing in formation shifted, their expressions solemn. It was rare to see such purity in words, a child's truth cutting deeper than any speech written by adults. When Lily finished, the audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Max barked once, almost as if joining in the applause. That evening, back at home, Emily made Lily's favorite dinner, spaghetti with too much cheese. Max lay near the fireplace, content but tired. As Lily twirled her pasta, she looked over at him. "Mommy," she said softly, "Max seems sleepy lately." Emily smiled gently. "He's just getting older, honey. He's had a big life, full of love, courage, and biscuits." Lily giggled. "I'll give him extra biscuits tomorrow." But the next morning, Max didn't come when called. He was lying peacefully near the porch, the sunrise painting gold across his fur. His breathing was slow, shallow. When Lily knelt beside him, his eyes fluttered open. He looked at her the way he always had, with love, pride, and loyalty. "Hey, Max," Lily whispered, tears beginning to spill. "It's okay. You can rest now. You did your job." Max lifted his paw weakly and placed it on her hand. Then, with one last soft exhale, he was gone. The world seemed to stop. Emily found Lily holding Max's head in her lap, whispering, "Good boy," over and over. She knelt down and wrapped her daughter in her arms, They sat there in silence for a long time as autumn leaves drifted across the yard. News of Max's passing spread quickly. Officers from across the state sent messages and flowers. The police department arranged a special service for him, complete with a small flag-draped table and his badge placed in the center. At the ceremony, Officer Ryan Daniels spoke with a heavy heart. Max served with honor, loyalty, and love. He helped bring justice, but more than that, he helped heal a broken family. If there was ever a true hero among us, it was him. Lily stood next to Emily, holding a single white rose. When the speeches ended, she walked up to Max's photo, placed the flower beside it, and whispered softly, "You can go play with Daddy now." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Afterward, the city dedicated a small statue in the park, a bronze sculpture of a police dog sitting tall beside a firefighter's helmet. The plaque beneath read, "In honor of Max, a loyal friend, a brave soul, and a reminder that love never dies." Years continued to roll forward. Lily grew up, her life shaped by the memory of the dog who never stopped believing in her. She carried his lessons into everything: kindness, courage, and honesty. When she turned 18, she stood once again at the Memorial Park, now as a young woman. The statue of Max gleamed softly in the morning light. She touched the bronze paw and smiled. "I'm studying to be a detective now, Max," she said softly. "Just like you and Daddy." Behind her, Emily watched silently, her eyes filled with pride. Time had taken much, but it had given something precious in return: legacy. And somewhere, in the quiet beyond sight and sound, it felt as if two loyal souls, a firefighter and his K9, were still watching over the little girl who had once spoken two simple words that changed everything. "Good boy."